All right, well, good morning again. My name is Frank Cullen, and I'm the Executive Director for the Council for Innovation Promotion, C4IP. First, let me thank you all for being here, welcome you to today's event. We're very pleased to have a very distinguished group of speakers to share some insights on one of our key projects at the Council for Innovation Promotion. And that's, of course, the purpose of today's press conference is to announce the release of our Congressional Innovation Scorecard. This is our inaugural scorecard, so we're particularly excited to have the opportunity to share our findings with you today. For those of you who don't know, the Council for Innovation Promotion was founded simply for the purpose of making sure we focus attention on the role intellectual property plays in driving our innovation economy. To do that, we obviously need to interact with policymakers and the administration to ensure that there's a clear understanding of the important role intellectual property plays, how it drives our economy, incentivizes the investment that allows things to come to market, enriches people's lives, and also enhances our global competitiveness. Many of you in this room are already well aware of the role that IP plays, but unfortunately too many folks on the Hill do not seem to be as focused on this as we would hope. So again, we're delighted you can be with us, looking forward to a robust discussion. Please feel free to ask questions towards the end of the presentation. And with that, I just want to introduce our speakers. We're very fortunate to have leadership at C4IP of some real thought leaders in the IP ecosystem. David Kapos and Andre Iancu serve as our co-chairs. They, of course, both served as Undersecretaries of Commerce for IP and directors of the USPTO. They bring a wealth of knowledge and experience. We're also fortunate to have former Chief Judge of the Federal Circuit, Judge Paul Michel, serving as one of our board members, and Kathleen O'Malley, another former Federal Circuit judge who cannot be with us today. We're also joined by Mayor Pugac, who's with Pugac Concilium, and a former member of Congress who was a true leader on IP issues and, of course, was the ranking member on the IP subcommittee on the House Judiciary Committee. So with that, I'd like to just extend my personal thanks to Mayor and to David Torstenson for the amazing work that Pugac Concilium did putting together this scorecard. And also a thank you to the entire C4IP team for all their contributions. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave to prepare some opening comments. And thank you again for being here. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this important announcement this morning. You know, so IP is fundamental to things that everybody cares about: jobs, economic growth, healthcare improvements, national defense. But Congress engagement with intellectual property has gone unmeasured. It's gone, in fact, almost unnoticed. The Congressional Scorecard that we're introducing today changes all of that. For the first time, it objectively measures what Congress is doing, both on an aggregate basis and on an individual member level. What they're doing to advance innovation by advancing strong and effective intellectual property rights. With IP being so core to advancements in innovation, to economic advancements, to national leadership, it is, but yet, frankly, fairly technical and often misunderstood, some measurement tool to help voters and the news media and policymakers and members of Congress themselves to understand what they are doing and not doing and should be doing to support innovation was badly needed. And the scorecard, the Congressional Scorecard, is the answer. Every member of Congress would undoubtedly say that they're pro-innovation, but so many don't make the link between innovation and intellectual property. The scorecard will help them make that link. So now every member of Congress will have a clear, simple way to ensure they're putting their pro-innovation sentiments into action by supporting strong and effective intellectual property rights in their advocacy, in their votes, in their appearances, in everything they're doing as part of their job. Every member can see now, using the scorecard, what they need to do to be an IP champion, like those identified in the scorecard. Senators Tom Tillis, Chris Coons, Mazie Hirono. Every member will be able to see what they need to do to become more like those champions, how they can improve their track record in supporting innovation by supporting strong and effective intellectual property rights. So thanks again for joining us this morning, and thanks again for being here for the inauguration of the Congressional Scorecard, which we do intend to update annually. And with that, I think I turn it over now to Mir Pugash to take it over.
Let me address the issue
Judge
of
Michelle.
why is it so important to rate the Congress or individual members? The reason is that Congress is the only agency of our government under present circumstances that can fix the mess. What mess? The mess that the courts unintentionally created, particularly the Supreme Court. For 18 years, the Supreme Court has issued a series of decisions that have sapped the strength of the incentive to invest in innovation in America. Not intentionally, but that was the result, and it cumulated. They started in 2006 when they weakened injunctions. In 2007, they weakened the obviousness doctrine to make more patents easily invalidated than ever before. And then between 2010 and 2014, they issued 4 decisions involving another ubiquitous patent issue and doctrine, eligibility. And the net effect of these cases and others, particularly as applied by the lower courts, has been to devastate the incentive. Without the incentive that patents provide when they're reliable and strong and enforceable, no business leader in a company or in a venture capital firm can justify making the large, highly risky, slow-maturing investments that our country needs. That incentive is absolutely critical. It can't come from somewhere else. The courts have trapped the country, again, unintentionally, because courts are hierarchical and rule by precedent. So when the Supreme Court says something, that is then echoed and sometimes expanded by the lower courts. And the problem with precedents is they have to be followed. When they're good, that's very helpful. When the precedents are destructive and harmful and confusing, then you're in a terrible mess. Only the Congress can fix the mess, and it's absolutely right for the Congress to be doing it not only out of need, but because in a republic, in a democracy, under the rule of law, broad innovation policy decisions are supposed to be made by the people's elected representative, not by unelected judges. And the Congress has the ability, through long hearings gathering enormous amount of data and analysis, to do it better beside. And in any event, the Supreme Court has made it clear they have no willingness at all to revisit or revise any of these very harmful decisions because they've turned down dozens and dozens and dozens of requests to do so. So our trap is clear. Congress has to rescue the country, and I hope it will.
Morning.
Good morning.
So I'm going to be the presenter, if you like, for this show. My name is Mir Pugac. Just 2 minutes about myself, or 30 seconds. I'm a professor for economics of intellectual property and innovation for the last, I hate to say, 27 years. So what I've been doing with my team most of my adult academic life is so-called measuring stuff, and measuring different IP environments and different policy environments and different elements and aspects of the ecosystem. Why I'm so excited about this project is that while we have been measuring different national IP environments like the GIPC, IP index, and many other issues, we've always looked at ecosystems. But we've never delved down into the people that actually enable or slow these systems. And while there is a lot of focus on governments, as has just been said now, actually parliaments, whatever they are, and especially in the US, they do matter. They matter a lot. So to actually connect the dots between how does a policy ecosystem for IP and innovation looks like, and how do people actually react, that has been a big privilege, and thank you so much for C4IP for allowing us to take this opportunity and do the research. Now, I would want to say that the report is going to be launched, and it's a very big report. What you have now is a brief of the results. You can look into the report in great detail into the different elements. And if there are any questions, feel free to contact us. What I'm going to do now is a very brief overview. So I think the trade-off for IP has been around for centuries. You hedge the risk about the private inventors and the private creators. You let them take all the risk, and if they fail, it's their sunk cost. On the other hand, if they succeed, you give them a certain period of exclusivity in which they are able to commercialize their inventions, innovations, creations, and then society can get and copy and enjoy the innovations and compete. So that's the trade-off. It's always been around. And certainly in the US, and we brought a quote by Washington before, it was been one of the first country, not the first, but one of the group of countries to identify the importance of IP and innovation to the economy. I think as we increase and as we go over time, we do see the different forms of IPRs are expanding. It's no longer the classical division between so-called industrial property and intellectual property, just patents and copyrights. There are so many aspects of IPRs today because they represent innovation. You cannot have any type of innovation or creativity today without actually the basis of support of different forms of IPRs to actually support it and to leverage it. So we do see many, many different types of IPRs which we've tracked in the research. Another thing, if you look at what happens over time, especially to the US is the knowledge hub and the #1 knowledge exporter in the world, and IP assets, the intangible assets, are by far now one of the most critical elements to industry and to the economy. Same with GDP. If you look at the economist in me, we always look at GDP. If you look at GDP growth over the years, you can see how much the intangible economy in the US is growing and its critical impact. So the big question, and now I come to a bit to methodology and results, the big question is, so who enables it? If we have an ecosystem, what enables it and who enables it? Now, we all know here that we are in a very strange situation because globally after COVID, one would expect that maybe all nations would respect IP, the vaccines that saves our lives, but actually challenges even more actually entered the door with the WTO waivers and others. So it's always almost a paradoxical relationship between the importance of IP and how they are being perceived. But also in the US, we had some troubled waters, and certainly we see some of the champions trying to has been said here, to repair the mess, or at least stabilize the water. So what is the scorecard? Just to talk 2 minutes about methodology. This is a year-long research. So I thanks all the patients for David and Andre and everyone else at C4IP because it's been a very, very long, struggling data collection. It is based on 3 layers. We looked at each and every member, Congress people, senators, etc. We looked at their legislations and the way that they voted. We look at the extent that they sponsored or promoted different types of bills, so 2 levels, the actual voting and the actual whether you were a sponsor or co-sponsor of bills. And we also looked at their digital footprint, their public activity footprint with regards to IP, letters that have been issued, press releases that have been issued, statements that have been issued, participation that have been issued. We collected all these, assembled laws and bills that have been passed in the 3 sessions, 16, 17, and 18. We gave them what you called a value score, meaning those legislations that promote, in our view, IP, and those that actually aim to slow it down or hinder it. We put it all in the mix, and we got the results. But tracking it was a systematic, very, very, as far as we could do, objective in the sense that some of the scores have surprised us to an extent, but the scores are the scores. The data is the data. So we presented it as we see it. I think, okay. To me, as an external, as someone who research IP, the main, if you like, conclusion is that the bulk of the elected officials of the US, which to me, especially where I'm coming from, is the #1 country in the world in IP and knowledge, like in everything else, getting a medium score, a C score, is not enough. It means that not enough elected officials spend enough time on promoting the things that are responsible for 80% of the economy of the US. We do have some champions. Tilis, Coons, Hirono. We do have some champions. They certainly lead the league. But we also, and you can see that in the brief, but we also see people from Congress, and we see where there are sometimes inconsistencies between those who vote more for copyrights but may vote against patents, or those who be in favor of patents but then be less in favor of copyrights. And that's another gap, because in our view, if you are pro-innovation and creation, you are pro-innovation. It's not about being selective. We've also seen that there are some like low-hanging fruit in the US where everybody is voting against theft of IP by China. Like everybody agrees on that. That's great. But what do you actually do to promote IP in the US? That's something that you actually should do as an elected official. Let me try to get to the results. So if you could see, in terms of the results, the median is where the lack of activity is. The median is where the lack of activity is, in the sense that it's not enough. Now, we've divided a score into so-called positive and negative. So you can get a full plus or you can get a full minus, depending on the way, on your orientation. So we can see those top performers, and we can also see those that, in our view, don't support the IP system and serve to weaken it. I don't want to go into names. You can see it on the slides, but to me, actually, the importance is the fact that there are those who are actively seeking to weaken the system, and there are those who actively seek to promote it. But the most important element is that not enough people try to promote it. So we have some senators, we have some Congress people, and by the way, we've seen that the Senate more active than Congress when it comes to IP. So something we want to see more. So to sum up, I think this scorecard can give you a one-by-one, and you have the entire names. I mean, if you have the brochure that you got, you have one-by-one persons getting the scores, so you can look at the scores, you look at the elected official. I think our point here is not to name and shame. Yes, that's a byproduct. Our point is to say to members of Congress and Senate, you can do so much more in this field and probably do so much more positively, because this is 80% of your economy. So thank you so much.
Whichever one. You're the boss.
Well, thank you, Mayor, not just for the presentation, but for the tremendous work you and David Tornston have done on this report. Really, Dave Kapos and I met with you exactly a year ago now, and we started this project, and the amount of work is tremendous. And folks who look at the detailed report will understand how much work has gone into this to research all the bills and the public statements and the letters that every single member, one by one, 535 of them, I guess, over the past 3 Congresses have done, and then put the methodology together. It's been tremendous, and this creates a brand new resource for the country as we look at these really important issues. So why are we doing this? This, when Dave and I started C4IP, we had a few goals, and creating accountability for each member individually was one of the top priorities for us. C4IP is a bipartisan organization. Everything we do is bipartisan, or actually nonpartisan. The representation on the board is bipartisan, and because these issues are bipartisan or nonpartisan. And what we wanted to do is to shine a light on the actions that folks on Capitol Hill take on American innovation and bills that relate to creativity and innovation. So why is that important? Well, we believe strongly that American innovation is at a crossroads. In fact, I believe that the country faces a new Sputnik moment. Folks will remember back in the late 50s, early 60s, when the country was surprised by the Soviet Union reaching space before we did, and launching the first satellite, the Sputnik, before we did, and the country committed itself in the 60s to change that dynamic. And there was a national call to action for that, and it succeeded. Well, that is what's happening now here, in my opinion, and it's multiple times the actual space race that was taking place in the 60s. We are facing international competition not in just one dimension. We are facing it in every area of technology. We are losing ground or have already lost the leading position in technology area after technology area. Autonomous vehicles, quantum computing, advanced materials, artificial intelligence, energy, one after another. And how do we know that? Every measure points in the same direction. China, for example, has and is obtaining way more patents now worldwide than the United States. One can quibble with whether the number of patents is an appropriate measure, which is fine. But every trend points in the same direction. The number of scientific and technical publications in peer-reviewed journals, China outpaces the United States now by a significant margin. China's gaining ground in leadership of standard-setting committees around the world in every area of technology. China puts out way many more STEM graduates, engineers, and PhDs than the United States. Again, one can quibble and question whether each one of these individual measures is an appropriate metric. But the fact is, every single one points in the same direction. So, with that in mind, what are our leaders doing about this? Are they paying attention? The reality is, and as our scorecard now demonstrates, is that legislators, by and large, are not attending to America's innovation economy. And they might go around and say over and over again that they are pro-innovation, that they need to take action against China stealing American IP, but legislator after legislator, as the scorecard shows, is simply not yet equating innovation with intellectual property and the need for strong intellectual property protections. If you are concerned about China stealing our IP, your bigger concern should be protecting IP in our own country. Our own intellectual intellectual property laws, our own protections need to be strong and protect intellectual property at home first, and then, of course, also internationally. And the reality is that the bulk of our legislators, 70% approximately, obtain a grade of C or C minus. And Mayor, it's not even C or C plus. It's C or C minus. And there are a number of legislators, both in the House and the Senate, that have grades of F and D minus, actively working to undermine American innovation. Of course, there are notable exceptions, and that is really great to see. Senators Coons, Tillis, and Hirono by far outpace every other single legislator in Congress. Congressman Ben Cline in the House also is leading in that chamber. Others in the House also are pro-innovation, including, for example, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Deborah Ross, Thomas Massey, and the like. But you can count these folks on a couple of hands, and the rest of them are not attending to what is a critical and immediate national need. We need a call to action. Just like President Kennedy in the 1960s issued a call to action that America shall lead in the space race by the end of that decade, our national leaders need to call the nation to action to retake the lead in innovation for the technologies of the future. And that can only happen by protecting American intellectual property, which forms more than approximately half of the U.S. GDP and approximately 90% of the value of the Fortune 500 companies. So a lot more has to be done by our legislators, and we hope this scorecard shines a light on those folks that need to step up, and hopefully they can be held accountable in a positive way, that they will do so for the good of the nation. So, and I'm certain that if that happens, the United States, just like it's done for the past 200 plus years, we will succeed. The innovative spirit in the United States is unbounded, and our laws simply have to encourage that and support that. And if they do that, we will certainly, I believe, retake the lead and continue to lead in these critical areas for the good of our national security and the well-being of all Americans, as well as everyone around the world. So anyway, with that, I want to thank everybody, and again, thank Mayor and also my colleagues on the board at C4IP and everywhere else at C4IP, Dave, Judge Michelle, Judge O'Malley, Frank, Jamie, Peter, who've done a phenomenal work on this. Thank you all, and really special thanks to Congressman Doug Collins, who has really provided a tremendous help to us to understand the thinking and the actions on Capitol Hill. So with that, let me turn to him.
Thank you, Andre. I appreciate it. And after you get all the intellectual health, you get me. So as we get this, it's for the I'll say from the books to the practical. And I think this is really where we got to draw this nexus, and why I'm so glad to see this happening. When I was in Congress, this is something that's missing. And what has been said here is all true. Everybody who's talked about this is, laid it in very real terms, that when we think about what is going on in our country, it is the intangible part. This is what I've spoken of many times before, and you saw it earlier on the complete flip from the 70s to now of intangible assets versus tangible assets. Here's the problem. I can show you a tangible asset. I can show you a asset in my manufacturing facility. I can show you that asset, and I can talk about that asset. It's harder for members of Congress and for others to talk about the intangible. We've got to get back to a place in which we're encouraging our lawmakers, and this is not just the lawmakers, but the industry as a whole, to start discussing intellectual property and all of its realm in a very tangible way. I've described it many times. It's the taking of the thought, which comes from a creative thought, which comes from the heart, which enters out through the hands and creates something. That is tangible as if I'm holding my phone here. It's intangible as I'm holding this microphone here. But what we've got to do is start putting that into perspective. I agree in this scorecard. It shows, I think, two things. It shows, number one, a Congress that is more occupied with other things and easy answers. I've been there. I get it. It's much easier to go for the bumper sticker. It's much easier to go for the quick win. It's much easier to go for the 5-minute YouTube video that goes back home and people understand it. It's harder to describe why it matters in your businesses to your work, to your constituents back home, that the real meat behind your whole workforce is designed by those who come up with the ideas to put forth a product. We've lost track in America in many ways of how that happens, because we're no longer, a lot of times, looking at the manufacturing, which is, again, have you ever noticed that how quickly members of Congress will all of a sudden jump on, we need to bring manufacturing back to the United States? That's easy, because they go back to their own thinking about, here's the manufacturing line, here's the production line, I can show you that. It's very much harder for them to say, how do we encourage the investment in intellectual property? How do we encourage the thought process that goes into getting there, which has changed our whole economy? That's why I think this scorecard is important. And I think what I view with this as, is from my perspective, is I view a whole lot in the middle who have no direction. And look, Congress is like any other body. They need to be led. Because if they don't see it across their desk, and if staffers don't see it, and there's many folks that I used to work with on the Hill that are here that were great staffers who understood this, if the members don't see it, the members can't act upon it. And this scorecard is highlighting something that if a member looks down and says, goes to their staff and they happen to see this and they say, why did I get a C here? I like intellectual property. They say, well, sir, you've been talking about this, this, and this, and we didn't think you were interested in this. Well, yeah, I'm interested in this. But it's also a second part of this scorecard. And here's the challenge. This is not just a scorecard for Congress. This is a scorecard for this industry. And I'm going to put it back on both sides. Congress has to take a leadership role here. They have to come into understanding this call to action that Andre just talked about is a very real call, because if we look at it, we can complain about it, and I don't frankly know about you, but I'm tired of complaining about issues and not solving issues. And we can complain about the rest of the world doing these things, and I think the metrics of China and the students in STEM and all are very real metrics that we need to be a part of, but how are we doing that now to translate that into measurable advantages for the United States? This is where Congress has to have the insight to say, this is why it matters. This is why, for too long, Judge Mangel, we've allowed the courts to decide this. You know why? Because it's hard. Okay, I'm going to give you the insight real quickly into the mind of a congressman or a senator. They wake up with the same 24 hours you do, and they have it, and all of you mostly in this room and those who may be watching, streaming, you have at least, I'll say 1 to 5 of your main focuses of the day. Most members of Congress on both sides of the Capitol building have anywhere from 1 to 700 different focuses of the day on who calls into that office. Now, that doesn't excuse it, but it just gives you the staff, when they have a staff and on certain committees on certain things that they're doing, how do we break through? Well, this is a great way. The scorecard will break through to say, hey, let's think about ways I can go home and talk about it. But I'm going to also put the emphasis on the folks who help develop this and the industries that are in maybe watching this. It's up to you as well. You're the ones to go find members and staffers who actually light this spark to get their member to be involved in it. Because when that happens, then the call to innovation starts. Then you find champions who are willing to stand up when nobody else in their district may understand it, but they'll understand it when you put stuff together. That's what we did in Congress. That's what I did in Congress. From trade secrets to copyright to patent issues, all of this has to come back in to the real form. But it goes back to one simple fact. I can score this all day long, but until we get to the point in which intellectual property, the intangible, becomes the tangible of this century, then it's going to be harder for people to understand, and we've got to make sure Congress understands that. That's the goal of this scorecard. I think it's the goal for C4IP, and I am glad to be here to be a part of that.
Obviously, a lot to digest, and certainly welcome your questions. We would appreciate if you direct your question to one of the panelists. Of course, any of the panelists can jump in if they feel like doing so. Once we actually get a question, though, I'm going to ask our panelists to please repeat the question, because that way it'll be recorded for those who are going to see this later. So with that, I open the floor to any questions. Bill.
Yeah, I guess this may be to Meyer or any of the others. The scorecard is hugely important. I mean, for somebody who's up on the Hill all the time, you want to be able, as you go into somebody, hey, how are they doing on IP? The scorecard tends to look in the rearview mirror, but as members of Congress, and Congressman Collins, you know this, you often want to know, how am I going to be measured on this bill, on this thing going forward? So to what extent is there going to be an effort going forward to telegraph this is going to be part of the scorecard? This is going to be important. And as a subset of that, you know, you could vote for a bill that has, 1,000 pages on it and may have IPs on it. Or you can vote on a particular bill. Is there going to be a weighting of certain bills? Hey, I led the charge on this particular legislation, or I joined 400 of my colleagues in voting for this big omnibus appropriations bill that happened to contain some IP provisions.
Thank you so much, Bill. So I'm going to put my geeky hat for 2 seconds, okay? And thank you, Frank, for letting me. I guess your question is, how do I measure things forward so that I can communicate to the elected what's important and what's not? So one of the exercises that we did, we looked at 16, 17, and 18. One of the, if you like, the good things about the bills is that, it takes time. It's introduced, but it's not necessarily, it's not introduced and passed in the same day. So what we are doing in the certain element of methodology, so if you like, there are 2 elements to the methodology. One is to look at the public activities, and as been mentioned here, it's also very important to be vocal, to be leader, to actually show that you want to make a change. But when it comes to the legislation, one thing we can do is to identify these are the lists, these are the bills that we feel are IP-related, innovation-related, and are eventually critical to the IP ecosystem, And based on how you've ranked before, you should pay attention on how you're going to be ranked now. And you still have some time to make a change, mostly if you've done nothing. But even if you've done something, you can autocorrect. So it gives us, while it's a session, you know, it's not overnight. So as we measure, and by the way, when we've done things for this research, things changed. New legislation came in. So we had to, and again, we've been pushed, but rightly so. And we've been pushed. But now I'm really happy to say we've included everything. So that's going forward, that's how it's going to take place, okay?
If I can just add quickly here, Bill. So on bills that are being introduced, we do plan to communicate on our website real time that how C4IP will score that bill in the next scorecard for the innovation scorecard. So if we think it's a good bill and you vote yes for it, we will communicate this is a pro-innovation bill and you'll get a plus point if you are in favor, or you'll get a minus point if you're opposed, the opposite if it's a negative bill. So we do plan to communicate that real time on bills introduced. You also asked the question about what do we do about an IP bill that's part of a big omnibus bill, and this happens all the time, okay? First of all, let me just say another finding of the scorecard, and it is in the detailed report, is that even though IP-intensive industries form almost 50% of the US GDP, the number of bills that relate to IP in Congress are less than 1%, like 0.5%. So there are very, very few bills. It's remarkable. It's been growing, but it's like a tiny percentage. Even though it's this huge driver of the American economy, they're just not attending to this. So there are very few bills, and the ones that are meaningful, many of them are part of omnibus bills. The Trademark Modernization Act, the most important trademark bill in the last 50 years probably, in December of 2020, was part of a big omnibus bill, as just one example. So, but it's an IP bill. And Mayor can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we scored it just like an IP bill. If you voted for it, it was a pro-IP bill, the Trademark Modernization Act, so if you voted for that omnibus bill, then you get the plus point. If you voted against the omnibus bill, for whatever reason you had in mind, it's just one vote, you get a negative point. That's the way it goes. You can do, if that's an important issue to you, you account for it in that vote. Did I get that right, Mayor?
Yes, and also sometimes you say, well, I'm under sort of like coalition type of, or discipline, or under type of party discipline. Fine, but you still get the score,
Yeah, well, and I'll speak from a member perspective there. I won't use the crude terms that's used most of the time on members on Capitol Hill. You get an omnibus bill, it's a sandwich that's full of a lot of stuff in the middle, okay? And that's good and bad. And so I think the issue we're going to have to come up with, I think in looking at this, and I so appreciate them letting me talk about this, is that, yes, I wanted the trademark piece, but I had like 500 other things in that bill that I couldn't vote for, okay? That scores me lower on IP, but yet I could have been writing articles and everything else about how this works. And I think that's why this encapsulates some of that. That's why this scorecard is a little bit different in that. But also, I will just say this: what gets measured gets done in life and in everything else. What gets measured gets done. And this is a providing way. So if we do look ahead and say, this bill's coming up, not just when it's introduced, but like if it's getting into committee, hey, reminder, we're scoring this. Reminder when it goes forward, we're scoring this. What gets measured gets done.
Some of it's very obvious because there are pending in the Senate Judiciary Committee right now two very important bills, one dealing with reforming the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, which is a mess, and the other dealing with the eligibility mess that was referred to earlier. And there's expected to be a third bill dealing with another one of these major issues, namely the unavailability, for the most part, of injunctions, even after infringement of a valid patent has been proven. So there are three bills right there that obviously will be very pro-IP as they move forward, so people will get rated accordingly, and there won't be any mystery to it. No one can say, oh, we didn't know, we had no idea you were going to rate the eligibility reform as a pro-IP bill. Of course, obviously it is.
I appreciate the judge bringing this up, because I want to bring up something. We did a bill several years ago. It had to do with trade secrets, and the injunction provision in trade secrets works. It is something, because we just saw it, I think it was about a month ago, a huge issue with trade secrets going out the door. This was a bill that we passed on Chairman Goodlatte, and we worked on it bipartisanly. Again, that's the other thing most people forget. This is bipartisan issues. These are not necessarily partisan issues.
You know, one other thought on a higher level on this point, there will be some subjective calls. There always are, and I think that comes up in the omnibus bill question. We hope that we'll hear from members and their staff and are happy to engage with them to talk about what they can do to improve their scores along all the vectors that folks here have been mentioning, and to have a dialogue about how certain scores come to be. As Amir has mentioned, they're objective. They're going to be very transparently reported. The whole report is going to be digitized, so members and their staff can work with it, can look at their scores and understand them online. And we're happy to have conversations to help members and their staff figure out how to improve on those scores, whether it's on an omnibus bill, and as has been mentioned, you know, countering a vote or offsetting a vote that had to go in a wrong way for intellectual property for other reasons, with other pro-IP advocacy. We'd love to have those conversations, and the question gets us to that.
Thanks, Frank. Patrick Kilbride with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to preface my question by offering congratulations to the leadership of the C4IP, to Mayor David with the Pugatch Concilium. I think we can say that from this day forward, U.S. legislators are on notice that there will be data and accountability for their positions on intellectual property and innovation and creativity. Congratulations and thank you to all of you. My question is, really interested to look at the full report, but what did you find on a committee basis? Were there committees that were particularly strong, particularly weak, and what does that tell us?
Well, you know, usually you have the people that had the committees, but we actually looked at, so you might expect that, you know, the patent, whatever committee, you might expect they would get a higher score, and some of them do, but, or in the hearing, etc. But actually, we went on individual basis, and we actually went into looking at what people did in terms of promoting a certain legislation or voting for a certain legislation, and how they sort of like express themselves. So I do think that if you are a chair of a committee, you have a bigger platform, so you get a more positive score. But on the other hand, if you're a chair of that committee, it means that by definition you're more active. So I think it's sort of like, it's natural, but I wouldn't say that actually the committee itself doesn't tilt the result. So that's for me the most important element. I do want to say one thing, and that's to your issue. And I actually, one of the things, and that we have the list of bills that we've looked at and presented in the report, as a complement to the US, and something I would like to see much more, is not only more people becoming champions than 3 senators and 4 Congress people. Some of them had a committee. So I would like to see double the results so I would want to set targets in the number of champions that would have. You also see a diversity in the terms of the bill. Some of the bills are like corporate related, you know, big industry, big move, but some of them are individual. protecting the individual creativity, individual innovation. And I think it's so important that you can actually have this area. So these are the things that we looked at. So it's less committee-based, it's more personal-based.
But Patrick, in my view, that's a great question, and it may be a place where we can improve the report in the future. In my mind, the gravamen of your question is, if you're sitting on the Judiciary Committee, you ought to be really active on IP, and you ought to be pro-IP, right? And that's like almost an added responsibility, right, from being a member of a committee.
Yeah, thank you. We were really kind of curious to look at the full report and sort of see what the average grade by committee looks like.
Not great, in the sense that you wouldn't. The fact that you're in a committee didn't give you, as David said, extra points. It's whether you actually did the work that gives you extra points.
You would think, as Dave Kapos mentioned, you would think that if you're on the Judiciary Committee, you would have extra points.
Yeah.
You would think that there are more activities you would undertake. It's an interesting exercise that anyone can do it now. You have the report, you can just pick the names that are on the various committees and do the average. However, just thinking about it, I suspect they don't. Most of them on that committee do not have a higher grades. Obviously, the leaders that we've mentioned, Kuhn, Stillis, Hirono in the Senate, definitely outpace everybody else, and they are leaders on that committee. But if you just look at the averages, I suspect the answer is no, but we should look at it.
You know, as somebody who in a prior life advised a senator for 7 years, there's some easy steps that staffers can take and members can take to boost their standing on IP. So for example, co-sponsoring a key pro-IP bill would be an easy way to get a big bonus boost. And there are bills pending now that need more co-sponsors. The two that I mentioned, dealing with the PTAB and with eligibility, and soon there'll be a bill dealing with injunctions. Those bills ought to be broadly co-sponsored by all kinds of people. The vast majority of members in both bodies are not on the Judiciary Committee, but they are free to co-sponsor bills, and they should do that. And that's a very easy way to boost their score and help the country at the same time.
Paul Martinville with U.S. Inventor. First off, I think this is a really good bill. It would be very useful for us. We keep our own list internally. A lot of what said. But on Rallia, last year, H.R. 5874, there were 20-7, I think, Republicans co-sponsors, and many of those. And Rallia, I think, is arguably one of the most pro-patent bills in Congress, or was last year, hopefully we're dropping in this year. But of those 27 co-sponsors, most of them are graded a C. Is that a reason?
So once again, yes. By the way, I'm sorry I'm zooming out all the time, but I think that the zooming out gives you a sense of perspective. I would say that about 10%, 15% of the bills had, as you say, a rally of, a big group of co-sponsors. The other 85% are not. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, yes, I mean, when you do the measurements, everything that gets you a positive points count. But at the end of the day, it's a group of scores that eventually combined leads to an A or to an F. So the fact that you've co-sponsored something doesn't give you a score of an A. You had to either be a promoter, you had to vote for it, you had to vote for the other bills, the other 85% bills that you didn't vote. You had to actually issue a press release, you had to actually issue a letter of saying that this bill or this bill is good or bad, or had a meeting against the TRIPS waiver, or being vocal about something in a press conference, or or an op-ed. There are so many opportunities. That's what I'm saying. We did a huge research for a year. Like the number of data we've collected was huge. And thank you for all thank you mostly for David here, my partner who leads the Pugac Concilium research, but also our team members that, had their tasks. So one element is nice, but it's not what gets you there.
So I have to tell us that we are leaving at 11. We lose the room. So if we could have one last question, and then we're going to have to wrap up. Anyone else? Okay.
Hi, Congressman Collins. I'm curious what what kind of message you'd have for members of Congress that just maybe score in that middle portion, right, that are sitting right, as the graph shows, like right there on the edge. What would you tell them?
I would tell them to look at their own neighborhoods. Go back home. Look in their innovation in their own communities, whether it's your innovators, your songwriters, your musicians, your publicists, your inventors, your folks who tinker in the backyard. I come from a district that is, in the 70s, became one of the hottest intellectual property courts in the northern district of Georgia, and nobody would have expected that. Because again, it's the mountains, we're home of NASCAR, we're home of moonshine. We're not home of anything else. Except we were also the largest chicken production in the world. And so all of a sudden you had these guys in the back of their shops who had no college degrees, they had high school degrees, and they took their metalworks and they learned how to pluck chickens. They learned how to dissect, all of which became patentable, all of which all of a sudden ended up in courts. That's something that most members don't understand about their own districts. They don't understand the actual insights in this. And I think, so mine is, again, going back to the basic roots, and this is why I believe this is a co-op between not just what a member scored, but the industries who care about this. And again, I'm sort of a simple country guy, okay? Just break it down to me. Why does it matter? And I think sometimes I think most of the members are confused. They're scared to co-sponsor a bill that they don't understand. They do not have a staffer on their staff that understands intellectual property. They go to one or two members that they may think about it, and if they don't understand it, then they say, let's just see how it works. I've been there. I understand that. This is why I think looking at, and I think the previous question is an interesting question, is, this scorecard takes into far more. I've looked at a lot of scorecards in my life, some of which I agree with, some of which I thought were junk, and some of which I thought were agenda. This one is actually an interesting scorecard in that it takes more than just a vote on a bill. Because if you actually took just a scorecard on the vote on bills of intellectual property, this would be a pretty small report, okay? There's not a lot of bills there. So it took into account what was mentioned earlier about all these other things. So I think we've got to get the people understanding this is not necessarily a scorecard about bills, which it is, but it's a scorecard of understanding your district. It's an understanding of the economy in America. And if you look at that, then you can become a champion if you were. I'm not concerned about having 535 champions of IP. I'm concerned about having enough that care to actually tell other members. That's all I care about. Because I remember a time when Hakeem Jeffries and I came together on many bills that nobody else understood or cared about, and we passed the House by massive margins. All it takes is somebody with a vision and a dream, or a staffer who has that same vision to get to their member. That's where we got to be at this thing.
So thank you, Congressman, and thank you to the other panelists. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, a lot to digest, as I said at the beginning. We welcome your questions going forward. Also, Patrick, thank you for your comment, because we actually want this to be a dynamic and continually living and growing type of a study. So at the next iteration, expect other items to be included, and we'll certainly appreciate the input from people here and other interested parties. And please visit our website. Today's event will be up on the website, and if there are folks that you think would have an interest in this, please direct them to the website. And again, we appreciate your input, appreciate you being here, and look forward to continuing this effort. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.